Good morning, everyone. My name is Keely. I serve as the communications manager for the Diocese of Washington. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're pleased to bring you this session on essential communications during and after shelter in place with our marvelous speaker, Kem Meyer, the president and founder of Less Chaos, Less Noise. Kem has spent 3 decades working with organizations and companies across a number of industries, big business, small business, not-for-profits, churches. And for the last several months, she's been working with me, coaching me in my transition from executive assistant to Bishop Marianne over to my new role as the communications manager, and helping us set up a strategic plan for communications that is in alignment with our diocesan strategic plan. So today, well, I'll just say one more thing. I'm reading from a script so I don't get lost. These last several months have been extraordinary, reshaping how we make decisions, prioritize our work, and consume information. It's also changing how we share information. Today, Kem will share 3 things that we can do as communicators to pivot our approach on not only what we offer our communities, but how we talk about it. So we'll cover today how to steward resources and attention with focused options, how to build trust and deliver care with relatable messaging, and how to motivate engagement online and off. So without further ado, let me say welcome. Kem, we're glad to have you with us. Over to you.
Thanks, Keely. Appreciate it. All right, guys, good morning. I can't see your beautiful faces, but a little later, I hope to hear some of your beautiful voices. Let me just call some slides up that I think will help us. Let me tell you how this is going to work today. I'm going to share some information, and it's okay if you use the chat. Don't use the Q&A. Use the chat, and you guys can interact and you can ask some questions. I'll try and pause and kind of look and see what questions are coming through, but more than anything, Keely and Peter will bring some of the recurring or the big questions to the front. About 3 times I'm going to pause through the presentation, and we're going to stop and let you guys kind of raise your hand. We'll turn on your mic, and we'll get a little bit more interaction and context. And Peter will give you, I think he's given us a little instruction in the chat. So open your chat and make sure you have it set to all participants so we can all see what everyone's sharing. I learned some stuff on Tuesday. There was some really good content and some observations and some questions, but it was only being shared with me, and I thought everyone could see it. So make sure you have your chat set to all participants. And there's going to be a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3 times throughout our next 90 minutes. Well, I'll pause for a second on some of these big ideas we're talking about. Have your voice come in, and we'll talk around it for a few minutes. All right. So let's get these slides called up. Okay, and Peter's let everybody know how to raise your hand. Yeah, I never knew that. So a little *9 is how you raise your hand. That's very interesting.
That's actually for people on the phone.
Oh, for so dialing.
One person who's on the phone, so press *9 if you want to raise your hand, and we'll acknowledge you and get your question.
That's great. Here we go. Thanks. See, this is what happens when I try and do tech support. I used to do tech support for years. I was mediocre at it, as you can see. Okay, let's get started into some fun stuff. It's fun for me. I hope it's fun for you. All right, let me share my screen so you can see what I can see. Peter, it's not letting me share screens this time. Did I dial? There, I can now. Here we go. That was fast. Can everyone see our slides? Let me just see if I can see the chat. Give me a yep, or a yeah, or a yay. And then I know my chat is working and you can see my slides. All right, here we go. Great. Let's get started. Thanks everyone for participating. Sarah, Elizabeth, Susan. Hi, Richard. Okay, here we go. Why are we here? Let's get a baseline, kind of set expectations. Got people from all over the diocese. We've got some rural and some urban and some city and some multicultural parishes and context. And so we've got a wide gamut. And so today I would like to just start the baseline of what we all have in common. And this is why we're here. The whole way of love of the Episcopal Church, we are here to draw people to Jesus and embody his love for the world. And the strategic plan for 2020 gets very specific about this for the diocese, equipping our churches for revitalization, inspiring individual spiritual growth, and creating more margin and energy as we strive for justice. And as we come together as a diocese, and together today, thanks for letting me be here with you on the journey, we want to amplify that collective voice and public witness. But another reason that we're here today is because our effective institutional communications is a challenge. And so in all of my experience, I have just become intimately familiar with the Episcopal Church over the past 3 years. And it has been one of the most beautiful discoveries I never knew I needed. I did not know how relevant and beautiful and timely, and it's everything that this world is missing. It has been one of the most beautiful discoveries of my life. I'm 51 years old and I just become acquainted with the Episcopal Church 3 years ago. Everything that is on this, embodying every person I've interacted with in the diocese, every single person I've met, whether it was a staff person or clergy or lay leader or one of your constituents in the area, I have felt all of this, right? But you struggle with the institutional communication side of things. That gets really complex, and it kind of buries the lead. It buries the best part. And I understand why. There's a lot of good intentions. There's a lot of good content. You want to get it right. You want to get it thorough. But there are some basic requirements of communications that we've got to meet before any of that stuff happens. So before anyone can encounter Jesus and his love for the world, they encounter us. So we've got to remove some of the barriers in just of our institutional communication. And I'm here to help with that today. But how are we going to do that? All right, we're going to focus. Communications is broad, it's complex, it's nuanced. It matters for each of the contexts, not just in the Episcopal Church, but also in the different parishes and the different cultural context. So how are we going to talk about all this in 90 minutes? Couple of ground rules or expectations. Here's where the next 90 minutes are going to take us. The first thing I want to say to you is you're not on here. I'm a little emotional as I think about everything you've been carrying on a normal day, let alone over these past several months. And so I'm not asking you to take care of me today. And actually for the next 90 minutes, you don't have to take care of anyone. I want you to be my guest. You don't have to take any notes. We will share these slides. We're recording this webinar so we can send it off to you. And I am going to turn, off my, just one second, guys. I just have to turn off my notifications. It's the only thing I didn't do this morning. Well, and besides, I had some bad math this morning too. That was another story for another time. Okay, here we are. All right, so you're not on here. You don't have to take notes. We're recording this session. We'll share the slides. You don't have to work. Please be my guest, all right? The second thing is this is not a how-to conference. This is not an instruction manual. This is not this is what you need to do when you leave here. We are going to just cover some basics. It is a primer for the easy stuff. If we get this stuff in first, then it frees up so many more opportunities for us, and it makes our communication more effective. So the biggest barriers, I'm going to address that today. Just in basic communication, whether it's in the church or not, this is interpersonal, institutional laws of communication. So We're not going to get into all the how-tos, all the 4 examples, but you're going to have enough today that you're going to be able to leave with some easy wins. I want you to be able to be done with our 90 minutes and know, well, there's something I can do right now, because life's complicated enough. I don't want to give you something any more complex, and I know you don't want to take more complexity to the people you're serving. And so that's the other thing. And like I said, we'll have a few stops along the way for Q&A, and I'd love to hear your voices. We tried some chat Q&A on Tuesday, and it worked, but it worked better when we were able to hear some voices, and so we're going to do that today. All right, so that's the ground rules, and that's where we're going for the next 90 minutes. And so the thing I would like to do now is pause for a second in the chat. And does anybody have any questions about where we're going or how we're going to do it, or anything that I've forgotten? Because I'm going to pause for a second and just watch what you tell me here in the chat. Make sure it's set to everyone, all panelists and attendees. While I'm waiting, sounds good. Thanks, Karen. Let you guys know I got a brand new milk frother on Amazon last week, and it's one of the greatest things that's happened in the last several months. So I've got frothy, luxurious milk foam on this coffee today, and it feels very, very luxurious. All right, no questions before we get started? Anybody has questions about my milk frother, just let me know. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing that we need to get out of the way is communication is not getting information out. It is getting through. And the other thing I would like to share with you today, just as a reminder, remember this, in all of our conversations and all the 4 examples and all the principles I share, this is about our institutional communications. So what we're bringing forward from our parishes, from our dioceses, the stuff that we're sharing corporately, this is what we need help with. And this is what we need to get better at, making more accessible so that we accomplish our mission that I shared at the top of our time together. So bad communication just starts with a bad definition. So let's start with the right definition. Communication isn't getting information out, it's getting through. And part of getting through is knowing what people are experiencing on the other end, what's getting in the way of our good intentions and what they're actually experiencing. What's getting in the way between what we want to happen, our best dreams, and what's actually happening? Are we seeing decline? Are we seeing lack of engagement? Are we seeing confusion? Even on the stuff we're sharing. If I had a show of hands in the room, I bet almost everyone would raise their hand to answer this question. How many times have you heard people in your parish, let alone outside your parish, say, well, I didn't know about that. I didn't see that. I don't know what's going on. Where can I find that information? Just on the basics. So most of the time, that's because we're chasing the wrong symptoms. And so I want to give you, I want to give you 3 things that will help minimize those symptoms. Stop chasing the symptoms and let's treat the source together. All right. Now, I learned a lot, everyone. I learned a lot on Tuesday when I got to spend some time with some of your other peers. Is there anyone that's on the call today besides Keely and Peter that was here on Tuesday when we were together? If you were here on Tuesday, give me a little hello in the chat. Hello, Andrew, Lynn, Jennifer. Okay, thank you. So I learned some things, Elizabeth, thank you. I learned some things that we had a better engagement and a better understanding, when I could hear the voices of people, because I interpreted your questions through from my filter, and I needed more of your filter as we dialogue. The second thing I learned is that what I was sharing on these simple concepts, I'm giving some broad strokes, and there was great feedback about more specificity. And I just want to reiterate here, we just need to remove some barriers and go back to that definition. If throughout our time together, you're like, okay, yeah, but I need to know exactly how to do that and how do we include more? Just remember, our goal is to be more effective with our institutional communications and remove the barriers so what we intend to get through gets through. All of us, including me, have to stop using our bad excuse of good intentions. And that's a little problem that we carry around in our churches. And so here's something you need to know. For institutional communications, there are 3 ingredients that have to exist for it to qualify as effective. This is the definition. These are the ingredients and the recipe. What you share institutionally, whether it's on your website or your Facebook or your handout or your emails or your videos, if it doesn't have these 3 ingredients, it's not effective communications. It does not get through. And the 3 are, it needs to make a connection with your audience so that they lean in, or they're motivated to engage and participate. So then they turn and share it, whether they share it by how they live, they share it with their behavior, they share it with their story, they share it by inviting their friends. But those 3 ingredients have to exist if you want your institutional communication to be effective. So what I'm going to do today is share 3 things you can do to ensure that's happening. How do we organize our information, share it? What changes do we need to make sure it includes connection, engagement, so people share it? All right, let me start though by just showing you a real simple example. What does it look like when a platform announcement or a statement from your church or from the government includes all 3 ingredients? Is it about accuracy? Is it about length? Is it about timing? Is it about eloquence? All of that depends on what you're trying to accomplish and who you're talking to. But here's a recent sample from some governors, how they communicated about the shelter in place. 2 out of the 3 don't have all the ingredients for effective communications, but 1 of them does. So I'd like you tell me which one of them does. So here's the first one. It's not real complex. I'm ordering a shelter-in-place order for the citizens of Florida for everyone's safety. Pretty clear, seems effective. What about our Mississippi governor? I issued the stay-at-home order for our state so we can slow the curve of coronavirus exposure. Maybe a little bit better. It's kind of active. It's not preventative, it's more participatory. What about this one? If you all want football season, you better stay in the house. That last one has all 3 ingredients. He is speaking to his audience. They are motivated to participate. And sure enough, they're going to share this with everyone they know. So this is a great example of just all 3 things. Now it takes a minute. It just takes an extra few minutes as you plan a little statement like that, as you plan a social media post. Think about how people are going to engage. Are they going to engage enough that they read it and scroll? Are they going to engage enough that they read it and it changes their behavior or what they do with their time or their money or their mind or their heart? Or is it going to have the 3rd ingredient that not only do they stop, back up and read it, get motivated enough to participate and tell others about it? So let's get into some examples of how we can improve those chances. If we want to start incorporating these 3 ingredients into our institutional communications, let's just start. Any questions before we get going in the chat? Just little about the Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Are you guys still drinking your coffee too? It's a much quieter group than Tuesday. It's a little, that's right. Okay, if you want to increase your institutional communication so it has more chance of people connecting, you need to narrow the focus. Narrow the focus of what we're leading with. So let me help get into some examples of this. All right. everything that's happening in your ministry, everything that's happening in your city, everything that's happening in your neighborhood, everything that's happening in your parish. There is a lot. Everything that's happening in the world. There is so much. We can't communicate all of it up front. There's infinite need, there's infinite information, and your audience isn't looking for more information. They're looking for help making sense of all the information that's available. So in our attempt to provide relief, in our attempt to provide care and support, we're actually adding to the problem because we're just putting more and more and more and more on top. So part of it begins with us just stopping and reorganizing what we have. And you can start this by just looking at everything you have in your bulletin, right? You could start there, which you haven't had a bulletin in a few weeks, a few months. Everything that you have on your website and everything you have in your email, or everything. We could even start with everything that you're leading right now on your own plate in your day. What if we just looked at all of that and we started grouping that in piles, just like when you clean out your closet? Okay, this I'm going to save, this I'm going to give away, this I'm going to keep. So you've got all these different piles. I want you to do that. It's like, okay, prioritize all this stuff. All right, this is everything we do. This is not relevant anymore. This can wait till later. But right now, this is what's most crucial and what I'm going to focus on, and it's what I'm going to lead with. It doesn't mean we can't find stuff other places, but this is what I'm going to lead with. Now, what does that look like? First, you've got to prioritize all that. Take inventory and prioritize it. Then you make your plan. I'm doing a lot of waving. How's that translating on the web? Don't answer. Okay. After you kind of prioritize all this, then you can make a plan, but you can't plan until you prioritize. So let me give you a couple of examples of ways you can do this. These are effective ones I've seen. So the first one, a couple of months ago, I worked with a church that just had hundreds of ministries and multiple campuses, and they were so overwhelmed and so discouraged because they're trying to figure out how do they keep this going during COVID, and what do we do now, and how do we move everything online. And there was a lot of dissension between all the different departments and ministry leaders and pastors and elders and what takes precedence. And I asked them for their plan, and the plan they sent me was 8 pages. And I said, so this plan, you can't get cohesiveness or coordination or agreement on your own church staff, paid and unpaid church staff. How do you think that it's going to land on the people that you're trying to serve and care for? You need to hit stop for a second, because in addition, all these people are working from home, which makes things exponentially harder for different reasons. They were homeschooled. People were having to homeschool for the first time. So we needed to kind of stop. And this is what we came up with. There was an interim short-term strategy. You can do something like this. Not what's everything we do. What's everything we're going to do for the next 4 weeks? What's everything we're going to do for the next 8 weeks? Then we'll revisit it with new data. So here's just a real simple sample. They're like, okay, starting now, there's not all these different ministries and all these different departments. We're one team right now, and we've got one job. It's COVID response. How is our church going to respond to the COVID crisis? How is our church going to respond to whatever issue it is right now, these times? We've got 2 audiences, our church and our community. We've got internal and external. How are we going to care for those 2 groups in this time? Who do we have around our table? Who has God brought to us? What are our gifts? What are our resources? What can we do well? Everything else goes on pause temporarily, or it gets, doesn't, like on Facebook, you don't have to unfriend somebody, but you can unfollow them so they don't show up in your newsfeed. You can always get to them if you need to. It's kind of like that. So we're like, doesn't go away, but it gets paused, or it's not on the newsfeed. It's still there, but it's not on the newsfeed. So when it comes to caring for our external audience, here are 3 things our church can do really well. We can do this really well. We can increase our food bank hours. We can increase the food we have available. We are really good there. Let's just expand that. Food bank has become a primary focus for us. Also, We're going to assemble some pop-up volunteer teams to find out what care and relief is required in our neighborhoods for people who are struck by the quarantine, not the shelter in place, but the quarantine. Do they need childcare? Do they need medicine? Do they need encouragement? Do they need signs? Do they need flowers? We're going to assign some volunteer teams to figure that out, and we're going to respond as a church. And then also, we are going to start the largest phone tree in our state, and we're going to make sure every senior that is isolated at home or in a facility with no interaction, they're going to hear from somebody and who will sit on the phone and talk to them and ask questions. And we're going to put together the biggest phone tree anybody's seen. We're going to do that well. And as you can see on the other side, here's what we're going to prioritize for our church. We're going to make sure we have our small groups and we're gathering. We're going to make sure we do something for our kids, and we're going to make sure people see our pastor in little 15-minute increments. They insisted on doing these morning and afternoon sermons on a daily basis, and I knew that wouldn't last, but they started there. But what was beautiful about that is they thought about life is really, really hectic, and most people aren't sitting at home in their community with time on their hands. They had less time, and so they didn't need more time on the computer either. So the pastor shortened his sermons and made them a little more relational. Okay, so we're in narrow the focus. That's one thing. I'm giving you one example of how we do this. How do we do this? Here's one example on a strategy. Now, another thing you can do, great, let's say you've got your strategy. Many of you do, and maybe you'll be able to share that in our little pause time when you can raise your hand. But maybe you don't, whether you do or you don't, you may have a lot of content, and maybe that's where you need to start. Just grouping your content, maybe not your ministry strategy, but how you share your content. There's a way to do this as well. And it could look like this. You give each day a theme. So you're not promoting different, all the calendar events, all the needs, all the news, but your readers and you can start to just put things in thematic buckets. Here's an example of one church, how they did that, right? And you can kind of change that. I'm not convinced that you need to put something out there every day. This particular church did. But I just wanted to share one real example that wasn't my own. I talked to another church. I absolutely loved what they did. They simplified how they were sharing their content in their newsletter. They had started out by sending multiple emails a week, right? Just trying to keep everybody, here's what we know, here's what we're going to do, here's what we need. It was just like anytime somebody had something to say, the pastor or a ministry leader or a staff person, it was very reactive, and they just kept sending all these emails trying to be helpful. We even experienced that a little bit in my own church. We're just trying to keep people up to date with the information we have. And it wasn't helpful because that wasn't the only email people were getting. We couldn't keep up with the emails in our inboxes. And so this church just broke it into 2 emails a day. 2 emails a week. On Tuesday, here was the theme. On Tuesday, this is everything about being the church. So anything on Tuesday is just ways to serve, our donation lists, volunteer openings, and that's all it was. It's like, here's all the opportunities to actually be active and respond to the need. Tuesday's theme is be the church. They sent out one more email on Friday. Friday was all about how to feed your soul. So it was the devotional resources, stuff about the worship gathering, stuff about recommended books or resources or webinars for spiritual growth. And so it was just broken into those 2 categories. That is one way to narrow the focus. Either simplify your strategy for a short term where you kind of flatten your org chart and bring everybody together for this response that you can always change it, or simplify how you're organizing your content. Another example of narrowing the focus, helping people make sense of the information that's available to them, also helping you spend less time in administration and more time in ministry. That's another benefit of this, and I think Keely might be able to speak to that a little bit too. But another example is just go to your webpage and remove the stuff that doesn't matter right now. There's a bunch of stuff on our web pages and on our Facebook and on our email communication that made sense before, but it doesn't make sense right now. So we can pause it for a minute and just lead with what makes sense right now. So I've got a couple of examples, just some screenshots and from some churches a few months ago. When this hit, they hid what wasn't relevant right now. They reorganized their homepage, just highlighted what was crucial. That's all that matters. Let's highlight what's crucial and kind of move everything else to the background. So this is a large church that had all kinds of options and a busy homepage, and they just narrowed it down. They changed their messaging and narrowed it to 4 things. And these are the 4 things you need to worry about. And this was a big contrast to what they led with before. Another church responded. This was a very small rural church in Texas, and they're in the middle of a longhorn steer field. The church office is they share space with these longhorn steers. It's a very unique area. And when shelter in place happened, they got real focused, and they said, right now, the first thing we need to do is make sure the people in our church know how to stay connected. We're going to facilitate that. And here are all of our groups that existed. Let's make sure they know where they can get their resources and how they can connect with each other. After we assemble together as a church, then we're going to start responding to needs. And this is all they did. They led with this, and they kind of hid everything else. Their front page news wasn't services are canceled, join us online. They made a decision, let's group up, figure out how we can respond because of their rural area and how intimate their congregation was. You all may recognize this friendly parish. Richard did the same thing. He minimized the things that were on the parish webpage. He couldn't fix everything, but he went and said, how do we address our messaging and make it current to the times? How do we lead with what's most important? And how do we just focus on the top 3 things right now? And Richard, I actually don't even know if those are the 3 options that you still have, but that was another great relevant example. So that is, I'm going to pause my slides for just a minute and let's stop.
Kem, you're muted.
Hi, I'm not muted anymore. Thank you. I'm back. Okay, so we just talked about the first ingredient, which was narrowing our focus. I want to stop for a second, and I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any examples out in your area or at your parish or in your context where you've begun this, you've seen the benefits or ideas that you can share with others? Or do you have questions for me? Something where you're like, that doesn't make sense to me and I'd like to get some more clarity. So raise your hand or hit *9 if you're calling in, and Keely and Peter will turn on your mic and I can hear from you. Narrow your focus examples. Keely, do you want to talk about some of the ways you've narrowed your focus while I'm waiting on some of our participants to think if they have questions or if they have any examples? While you're thinking, friends, I want you to think about things maybe you've seen as well, right? Not necessarily in the diocese, where you've seen your favorite grocery store or your favorite restaurant or a company that you follow, where you've seen them get real essential. And thanks, Richard, I appreciate that. Where you've appreciated what they've done as a model.
So
Karen,
it looks like Ginny might have, Ginny Gervasi might have a comment to make. Ginny, you seem unmuted.
I'm always unmuted. Hi. So my question is more general, which is that I'm the website guy for my church and I'm the rector of my church. And I know how to post different content, but I actually don't have the knowledge or ability to modify the WordPress sort of format. And I have found myself having to, make decisions about what I have time to invest in and what I don't, and what we have money to invest in and what we don't. And so I guess part of my question, and I saw you in the ones that you did for Unstuck Church, and I was just blown away by how incredibly useful that was. And that helped me modify my homepage now. But how do we, when the reality is many of our churches only have a staff of 2 or 3 people, and I don't have the expertise to do the web page, how, if you can give us any advice when we're like so small in terms of our staff or our resources, what we can do, how does that factor in, I guess? And now I promise I'll be quiet.
Ginny, that was helpful. Thank you for that. I will say scarcity breeds clarity. And so I want to encourage everyone. I mean, I am essentially a staff of 1-2. My business is small, and I am also the business owner and the content creator and the care provider and the administrator and the web guy. And my stuff gets out of date, and I can't fix everything, and I've got limited resources. And so I've also worked with churches that have a part-time pastor, and that's all they've got. And I've worked with churches that have hundreds of employees. And I will tell you, the more resources, it does not mean it's better. They just do bad bigger. I will tell you that. I have seen it over and over again. And one of the things that I have seen in these small cases and that scarcity breeding clarity is to just give ourselves permission to not try and fix what's there, hide what's there, and just lead with what's relevant right now. And then we'll figure out the rest as we can. Many times we get into trouble because we're trying to fix what's already there. And with WordPress and Squarespace, it's $30 to turn that on. And we've got kids in our high schools now that have been coding on this stuff since they were in 6th grade, and just pulling them in and saying, here's our objective, here's what we're trying to communicate. You give them the plan on the paper, and that can be turned around. If you can, all of us, me included, I mean, I'm in the middle, same thing. I have spent the last 3 years trying to fix a website, and finally somebody got in my face and said, why are you trying to fix this thing? You need a new one that is about 1/8 of the size of this one. And it took somebody like giving me a dose of my own medicine to realize, right? So I want to encourage you all in that. And sometimes I think that's harder. It's just like letting go of what we've held on to for so long. What's hard is not the web work. It's letting go of what we built for so long. I'm like, there's such good content on there. I don't want to get rid of all that content. I mean, it was very hard for me. And when I was on staff at a church, people I'm working with, not just churches, but especially churches, that's good content. So tell yourself you're not deleting that content. You're just reorganizing. Let's lead with what's essential, start over, hide everything else, and then slowly introduce the stuff. And I'll share one other little secret I've learned over the years. If you just go live with what you need right now, and even if you're getting pushback from people, well, where's such and such, and where's that? And I don't see, you can let everyone know, we're going to introduce that stuff back. This is just temporary. We have to lead with what's most important. You can have a 1-page website and serve your churches and your communities so well with a 1-page website. And we're going to get more into how people use the web as we go on in this webinar. But what I've learned is we get so scared about cutting things that we won't cut them. And then once we cut them, we don't get as much pushback as we thought because people weren't using it anyway. Or the people that do push back, if we're able to tell them, hey, for now, we are just going to lead with what's most important, and we're going to revisit this in 3 months. We're going to revisit in 3 months what's missing and figure out where our ministry is suffering because of the content we've cut. And 9.5 times out of 10, that stuff does not need to be reintroduced. So it's just kind of a slow change. I hope that helps a little bit, Ginny, and thanks for the question. It was very good, but I'm going to move on. Okay, well, this is good, Jeannie. Let's talk about this. Yeah, well, we can talk about how to engage other people. I just brought that up as an example. It doesn't have to literally be a high schooler. Keely, go ahead.
Kem, I'm not sure if Jeannie's comment was to attendees as well. So you might want to restate it.
Tell me what you mean, Keely. Go ahead and restate it for me.
Yeah, so the other people aren't seeing it.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh, Jeannie. Okay, so yes, everyone remember on the chat, set your chat to all panelists and attendees. Thank you. So everybody couldn't see what Jeannie said. Jeannie said, high school kids in our church do not want to take on the web work. And they also like it when they dislike it when they hear the attitude or perceive the attitude, let's get the youth to do it. As soon as they hear that, they say, no way. We're not going to be able to get to that granular level today on our webinar, but there's ways to do that. And and high schoolers may not be the answer. That was just one example. I've seen successes in some places, but not every place. Thanks, Janet. I'll make sure I read these. I'll read these when they come through. Okay. Yes, make sure you set your settings on the chat, all panelists and attendees. All right, I'm going to share my slides with you guys again. Let's go to our second ingredient. Let's go to our second ingredient of effective communications. We just spent some time on narrow the focus because we want to actually connect with our audience. And so now we're going to go to our second one. You guys get to see St. Margaret's again. Okay, can you see my slides? Chat is turned back on. Yes, okay, let's go. Our next one. We want people not just to make, we don't want to just make it a connection, but we want people to engage. We want them to be motivated to participate. So the way we're going to do that is make it personal. And I will say for the diocese and for the Episcopal Church, the best way we can make it personal is to get rid of some of the jargon in our communication vehicles. I am not talking about what we do in our worship services or our sacred gatherings in our sanctuaries or online or off or on our readings, or I'm not talking about that. I'm talking on our webpage or our Facebook or our email. We're closing out engagement because there's so much jargon. I'd like to share this. Remember the principle here, the communication principle here for our institutional communication is that we want people to be motivated to participate. And the way we're going to do that is to make it more personable, more personal. And we can't make it personal with so much jargon because that's our language. It's our language that makes sense to us. It's our language that comforts us. And I'm not saying kill that language. That language is beautiful, but there's a sequencing to that language. There's a sequencing to that vocabulary. And these communication vehicles that we're using, not all of them were meant for that. This section here in the Make It Personal and just using some plain language in our communication vehicles, the whole point behind this ingredient is to think about how the people who are using our content, how are they using that content and how it affects them. Us actually seeing our community through different eyes. Or maybe what I'm saying is seeing our content through the eyes of the community rather than seeing the content through our own eyes. And I've got a little video that kind of demonstrates this in a funny way. So let's just take a second and watch this video together.
My brothers, this day you fought with honor. This day you vanquished those that mean to smite us. The Dark Lord forged his enemies to reap their terror, but we persevered and slayed them forthwith. In the years to come, they will sing our victory song, as we sung for our forefathers.
Sorry. Just one thing I thought I might bring up.
Whatever is it, brother of the watch? fellow kinsman,
Yeah, this
honoured knight of the Third Mint.
this is what I want to talk about. We are using way too many words, guys.
How doth thou mean, proud warrior of the North, brave son of the Ark?
There. That's what we could really speed things up around here if we just cut down on the wordage.
How so, brother of the cloth, defender of the North?
Well, like in battle today, when you yelled, I'm paraphrasing, but noble horde, raise thy shields, from yonder field of battle approaches, is it thy enemies' arrows? Yeah, next time, just yell duck, I reckon. You know, I mean, a lot of us died before you finished talking.
So, not speak in such an elongated way for the sake of the time.
Exactly. Actually, and just while we're on the topic, we were just talking about this morning. The tales that we tell, the one about the ring and the short, hairy foot people, maybe that could be just one story, you know, instead of 6 3-hour unnecessarily long stories.
Some merit you may have in your words, my brother. I see how my verbose retelling may elongate that.
I don't think you do. Yeah, even this, the victory speech you're making, I don't know. I just think maybe just say we won or something. You know, you guys would, yeah?
Your words have resonated deep in my mind, my brother.
Yeah, and I don't think they have, because he's still doing it.
We won! Yeah!
So I just want to reiterate here that what we're trying to talk about, this is all building on each other for the effective communication and the ingredients. This is so great. Like, a lot of us died before you were done talking in these communication channels, in battle, when we're looking at things on our phone, or when we're going to a website to accomplish something, or when we're sending stuff out in email and the people we're sending it to, they may not be experiencing traffic jams right now because more people are staying at home, but they are experiencing flooded inbox and information overload, and they cannot keep up. And so when we fail to highlight what's crucial, our audience disengages more and more. One of my favorite books in the past 5 years is this book, Simple Rules, by Donald Sull and Kathleen Eisenhart. They get at taking complex companies and institutions, and they talk about ways to make the complex volume of data or the complex nature of what they do accessible to more, so it can grow and breathe and people can carry it. It doesn't take away security. It doesn't take away quality. It doesn't take away the accuracy. It actually increases ownership and buy-in and participation. And so it's one of my favorite, but I love how they talk about this. We need to highlight what's crucial, so we're not ruminating over personal details. And one of the things that I've got to learn by participating with the Diocese of Washington over the past year is one of the strains our parishes and clergy is feeling is not enough time to respond to the critical needs. And I would encourage you to let go of some of our volume of content in a few basic communication channels, because they're not necessary there, and they're not as effective. Just think simple, again, our emails, what we post on Facebook, and maybe how we organize our website. I'm kind of concentrating on those 3 channels right now because I think those are the most important and the first place to start. Another thing that they talk about, when we complicate our systems, we overwhelm people. It increases the odds that they're going to do their own thing and stop following our rules. And that's the jargon. Yes, Jenny, that's what I was talking about. We also use so much insider language. And I think some of your insider language is beautiful. And the more I learn about it, the more fun I have. But then I become an insider, right? It's beautiful language. There's history in that. There's meaning in that. But there's not a place for that as we lead in some of these other channels. I've lost count of how many titles there are The first year when I worked with the Episcopal Church, I had to have like a lexicon and a vocabulary thing on my desk, just so I would get, and I mess it up all the time still. I get the titles wrong or the references wrong. I was like, okay, so what's the English word for that? And I think some of that's beautiful and sacred and fun, but it is insider for some of those things. So Karen asked a question, how do you suggest reaching folks who are not digital? This stuff also applies to printed newsletters. These principles I'm talking about, it applies to your handout in your bulletin. It applies to what we share in our phone conversations or announcements. So these basic principles I'm sharing in the primer about narrowing the focus and making it personal, and I'll share more about our digital outreach on our third point. We just need to think about how it's landing with people. These principles apply to all. So I want to reinforce one of the most important things we can do when we take a step in making things personal, so our audience and our participants and our members are motivated to engage in whatever that is. We've got to simplify the information that we bring forward, right? Eliminate the jargon and uncomplicate some things. So let's get into, well, what's one example? Like using that video as our springboard, how do we just simplify the language? Well, first of all, one power trick, and it is a superpower, is just moving from passive voice to active voice. I'm not asking anyone to change their writings or their devotionals or their message prep or some of these meaningful spiritual readings, any of that. I'm strictly talking about our functional institutional communication, newsletters, handouts, flyers, social media posts, emails, right? Like, so move from passive to active voice. That's step one if you're not already doing that. The second thing is just get rid of all the excess words. I learn a lot constantly reading. Ann Handley is an incredible writer, and she just makes so many helpful suggestions how to change your content to make it more usable for the people that you're trying to reach, because there's creative writing. For years when I led an IT department and I led a communications team, and I would look for content writers, and I got so many applications from creative writers. Creative writing or academic writing or research writing is different than content or content that's usable, right? For emails or digital content or our handouts like a bulletin. We've got to remember, I know I keep saying personable. You think that word might be right, Jenny? Well, I'm going to pause for just a second on these extra words. This was one area that we kind of had some questions about on Tuesday. Personable is exactly what we want to be as an institution. It's almost impossible to be truly personal, like you and I could be human to human. I can be incredibly personal one-on-one. That gets harder and harder to do as an institution in our institutional communications. But you're right, personable is achievable, and it probably is the right word for us to get around. So if we're looking at our content that we're sharing in some of these institutional channels, what are ways we can make it more personable? And this slide that we're on right now, just simplifying the number of words is one way to do that. So that's a practical example. Another practical example would be how we share our events, just making people read less. We don't have to explain the why and the justification and sell it. People can self-sort. They're smart, and the volume of information that's coming at them today is more than ever, and it just keeps increasing. So this is a church I've been learning a lot from through COVID. They have done a great job of serving their community well by making the information easy to access, easy to use, easy to share. And they have a post on Instagram every day. You don't have to do Instagram. I don't want you to focus on the channel or the tool. I just want you to focus on how they really simplified their content and how personable this is. Look, people organize their day by times. Here's the topics. If they need more information, it takes them to the actual events on the website. But this is another way to make it personal and to include, like, there's some topical stuff in there, there's some church stuff in there, there's some names in there. And so this is just, it's just a personable way to share news about events. Another thing, there was a great, Keely, can you remember who spoke up for us on Tuesday and had talked about the tension she felt? Was it St. Mark's, Capitol Hill?
Was it Michelle Morgan?
Yes. So Michelle Morgan was sharing, and she was like, it's really tense sometimes because I've got some of the older people in my congregation that recoil at the word discipleship, and I've got young people in my parish that are using the word discipleship, and I'm struggling because I've got these words that have got so much meaning and so much attachment, and I'm trying to reclaim some of these words. And I loved how she said that there's a lot of language that we can reclaim, and there is also power in paraphrase. Because part of the way that we are magnifying the way of love, and as people are moving into Jesus's love of the world, and they start to understand scripture, and our job is to help illuminate that. And we don't have to be fearful of the accuracy. We can illuminate the accuracy with some of the paraphrase or telling the story behind some of these words. And I don't know if there's anyone on this call today that's had a chance to browse this book, Learning to Speak God from Scratch. But Jonathan Merritt is a friend of mine, and he just did a beautiful job talking about a way of reclaiming some of that ancient vocabulary and language, but also building the bridge to a whole culture who has lost that connection. And so the harder we try and protect, the more we're disengaging our culture. And this was just a beautiful way of reclaiming so much of that. And you may find encouragement in that. I thought I would share it. So we've talked about 2 so far, right? We want to include connection. Our content needs to connect, and so people can engage. And the way we're going to do that is narrow the focus and make our content more personable. Ginny, I'm actually going to go back and change these slides to say more personable instead of personal, because I think you're right. I think that sticks even better. We're going to stick the landing better. So narrow the focus, make it personable. I'm going to stop sharing my slides for just a minute here, and I'm going to pause for questions or stories about this concept to make it personable. Have you seen good examples? Have you tried something? Are you struggling with this concept? Are you like, I don't agree? Like, let's have some hands and some sharing here. Questions. Personal to the audience, Lionel. That's a good question. You want to make your institutional communication more personable. Going back to our definition of communication, it's not getting information out, it's actually getting through. Keely, did I misunderstand that?
No, I was just going to say we have, let's go with Richard first, and then Ginny has another comment or question.
Hey everyone, Richard St. Margaret's. Thanks for the shout out, Kem. One example and this was coached by your beloved when we went through the Untitled Church process. Examples of getting rid of jargon. So we kept the jargon, but we explained what it was in the bulletin. So in the who's who list in the bulletin, what's a verger? I call them a holy stage manager. What's a lay Eucharistic minister? So we just broke down all these words, lector, and put little explanations in the bulletin so that people can learn.
I love that. Richard, I need a copy of that. That's really good.
That sounds brilliant. And Ginny.
Sorry about that. So I am just a really informal person, and that's why I picked up on you saying personable. I think that we have my whole worship services are often feel very welcoming and informal because that's who I am. Part of what I think there is a heavy bias in our church to think that holiness and sacredness equals somber, equals solemnity. And I'm not saying holiness can't also be that, but I think we have gone so far over on the side of somber, solemn as indicia of holiness that we need to just really loosen up. And I think that is relevant in your talk about our jargon, but also just the heavy formality and our own self-absorption in theological issues that the rest of the world doesn't even understand. I just see this, it's such a great entry into this deeper analysis we need to do of ourselves, that it's the way we communicate, but it's also the way we think. And I'm grateful for this conversation and for your whole personality and presentation of it.
Jenny, thank you. I'm super glad you brought this up. And this was one of my learnings from Tuesday. Honestly, I need to hear more from your context. And so I get so much more understanding just hearing what you guys are facing and carrying. And I want to share some freedom for all the personalities on the call, right? All the personalities on the call. I am not championing or challenging that you change your personality. I want you to be you. I want you to be more you, right? And there are places for, like Jenny, what you talked about, this holiness and this sacredness and this somberness. But in some of these communications channels that I'm talking about, like your e-newsletter or your emails or your Facebook or your corporate web page, your institutional web page, you are not canceling out the holiness, to your point, by making it more personable. So I don't want the clergy on the call or the lay leaders to feel pressure like I have to start communicating differently in my sermons or in my messagings or in my writings. No, but maybe you can loosen up a little bit on the institutional communication that supports all that. That would be a baby step, and they complement each other well, because communication is multidimensional and it's multifaceted. And when we listen to beautiful music, there's layers and there's dimension and there's depths, and the volume rises and the volume decreases, and the intensity heats up and then it softens up, and there's a lot and then there's a little. Communication is like that too. We don't want to have the same thing all the time. We want to have dimension in our institutional communication that is full of dimension, just like like humanity. And so I want to encourage who you are. But to your point, Jenny, thank you for sharing that and explaining the tension. And I want you to be who you are, but take some risks of loosening up in some of these channels. I'm going to look at.
Yeah, Kem, I was going to say we have a number of interesting comments in the comments.
Yes, so Sarah, you guys are doing great. It's going to all panelists and attendees. When I begin softening our use of language, I'm accused of dumbing down. People think this churchy language makes us sound smart. Girl, I know. I know. So what we want to do is get some language or get some wins, so where we point back to, we defer back to the purpose of the channel, right? My car wasn't designed to sleep in. My bed wasn't designed to cook on. And our websites and our e-newsletters stop working. People disengage. And so sometimes us moving forward with data is how we kind of defer those conversations. But Sarah and everybody else on this call that feels that too, be careful that you're not fearing the vocal minority. There's a few people that are very, very comfortable with that. And when you shift things and you move that lamp, or you take that chair away, or you change some of the language in the e-newsletter, they're very uncomfortable because you've moved things. And just let them know what hasn't moved. Point to what hasn't moved. Point to what is still true. Point them back to the mission. And I see there's some really, really good conversations over here. And I want to just jump in and keep dialoguing, but yeah, Sarah, yes, Keely.
I think there's one comment from Karen that we probably want to address before we move on.
Let me move up and find it again. Is it the one about having people submit content for our weekly emails? That one?
That's one.
Karen is saying, I often have a hard time getting folks to engage by submitting content for our weekly emails or periodic newsletters. Do you think that having contributions from parishioners helps with that personableness? I think it depends on the parish, and there's a couple of ways. I see two things in this, Karen, so I'm not sure if I'm interpreting this right, and I may get this wrong, but we'll have more time at a future date, hopefully, to engage. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. But the first question is, how do I get people to engage? And I just want to clarify what I mean by engage. I'm going back to the first slide I shared. We want people to be inspired in their spiritual growth. We want people to be encouraged by Jesus's way of love and his love for the world, and be more involved to strive for social justice. That's my definition of engagement. So when you're offering things, we want more people donating. We want more people showing up. I don't necessarily measure the engagement, what people submit for the newsletter. I don't know if that's what you were saying, but just in case, I wanted to address that. And then the second thing, as far as helping with personableness, even myself, I tried that whole thing when I built a whole volunteer team of content contributors. But because I was on the church staff, or anytime I've seen volunteers in meetings with pastors or clergy, they just give the church answer anyway, because they're there with clergy, they're there with the pastor, they want to be a good parishioner or congregational member, and so they just give the church answer. You guys have heard that story about the Sunday school, where the Sunday school teacher was asking, okay kids, I'm going to describe something to you, and it's small, I could hold it in both hands, gray, soft, big fluffy tail. All right, what am I describing? And the boy raises his hand and he's like, well, it sounds like you're describing a squirrel, but I know the answer is Jesus. And I see that a lot of times whenever I have tried to pull people from the church to like, hey, just talk normal. Well, they don't. They get around the church, or they get around the teacher, and they're like, well, here's the church answer, right? Just like what Ginny had said, like they're afraid that they're not being holy or sacred if they're not somber enough. But no matter who it is, if it's a staff person, if it's one or two volunteers, you've got to let them know what you're asking of them. I remember when guys, you're going to appreciate this because so many of these people on the call know Tony Morgan. Tony Morgan hired me. I started working with churches because of Tony. Years and years ago, 21 years ago, as a matter of fact. Wow. And I remember when he said, Kem, I'd like you to come and help us at church, help us with communication. I'd like you to join my team. We could use help with our digital strategy. And I'm like, oh no, Tony, I'm not a church person. I love my church, but I'm not a churchy person. He was like, oh, that's exactly why I'm hiring you. We don't need a churchy person. We need a person. And so, Karen, your question is good. I don't care if it's a parishioner or if it's somebody on your staff. You're on the right track where you're addressing, how about if I bring someone besides me? Like, let's start there. Or some not the usual suspects. That might help. But you still got to give clarity on what you're asking them to do, or they'll say, it sounds like a squirrel, but I know the answer is Jesus. Keely, you got something to say? Do you?
Just that we had 20 minutes left, and the other question, about sort of newsletter content, I don't know, Karen, you had another comment, a follow-up comment that says trying to get people to share their personal stories of outreach or how they've grown in their faith through isolation or other things they're doing. one thing is some people aren't writers, so that's not the way to capture that information. So that may be something to keep in mind. And also, is that story, does it fit with your newsletter? Like it might, but the newsletter is to help you. You don't do stuff to fill the newsletter. That's one of the things I feel like I've learned with my work with Kem.
Okay, that's good, Keely. Thanks for that. Okay, so let's go to our last one. I'm going to share my screen again. We're on our last point here. All right, sharing my screen. Here. Okay, I think everyone can see my slides again. We're on our third ingredient. All right, we've got 20 minutes left and we're going to fly through these. Again, we're just building on these principles, guys. I'm trying to mess with your mindset today. Ultimately, it's going to affect your skill set, but I want to help you get better and better at what you're already doing. Just remove the barriers to the beauty that exists in you and in your parish and in your diocese. And so I'm messing more with your mindset. That's why this is more of like a primer, but it is something all of us can do, no matter where we're at, no matter what culture, no matter what context, all of us can do these things. We can narrow the focus. We can make it more personable. Our institutional communication can be more personable. And the last thing we need to do is just pivot outward. Now, for today's primer, because we have made such a dramatic shift in the past, like accelerated in the past few months, I'm really going to talk about digital media right now. We've got to pay attention to the reality that we're living in. We can't deny the water we're swimming in. And so when I'm talking about pivoting outward today, it's not just you that is feeling a little whiplash when it comes to this digital transformation that we're facing. It is not going to replace some of our analog tools. It's not going to replace interpersonal communication and some of the organic face-to-face things that make our communities beautiful. But it is changing our institutional communication, and some of the things that we have done forever, it's going to change it forever. And it's not just you that is struggling with what that means. So this cartoon just cracks me up. And I mean, everybody is feeling this, right? 10 years of cultural change was accelerated and got done in a month. And I'm sitting there watching micromanagers and clergy all over the world, like frustrated and ticked off of working from home. By the way, I'm not comparing micromanagers to clergy. I'm talking about two groups, separate groups of people that are struggling the most with the staying at home. And so I am not going to talk in this last bullet so much about service streaming or the online worship service or the digital pulpit. I just want to help us look at how people are using the screen, because we've got to understand how our content is landing. Our in-person Sunday service is just one thing our church does, even before COVID. It is just one thing our church does. It is not everything. So we still need to filter. Don't think about the Sunday service right now. Think about everything else. How are we going to organize that communication to be more effective? So I see a lot of and hear a lot of excuses or feedback or answers to this question. Well, you know what? Technology is just ruining people's ability to communicate, or we can't connect with our community anymore because people are on their phones all the time, or we're not a techno, we're just not a technology. There's just a lot of excuses. Technology is ruining us. Well, I want to just kind of stop for a second. The guy who wrote the book on how to create habit-forming technology also followed up with a book at how to remain focused. It's so fascinating. He literally wrote the book on how to write habit-forming technology, and then he followed up with how to stay focused. And I think that you would appreciate something he said about this. This is for me too, right? Like, this is for parents, this is for clergy, this is for Business owners, this is for all of us. We can't blame technology. Technology is not the distraction. And this is what Near says. Technology alone cannot be blamed for distraction. In reality, distraction always has internal sources. Distraction is about escaping something uncomfortable, such as a rumbling stomach, marital problems, deep dissatisfaction with your career or the world, etc. Tech is only a proximate cause, but we blame it for our inability to get things done and fail to look at the underlying problem. So today, what I was sharing with you at the beginning of our time together, it's like, hey, we're looking at the underlying problem. We're not going to chase the symptoms. The symptom is technology. We're not chasing that. We're going to get right at the source. And the source is we need to narrow our focus. We need to make the content we're sharing more personable and usable. And we need to do this, guys. We are trying to see how people are experiencing what we have to offer. I'm trying to help us with our communication principles to look at our content through the eyes of our users and not look at it through our own eyes, because this is how they're seeing things and how they're using things. So this is just such a great, it's one of my favorite cartoons that really paints the picture of usability. And then going back to the definition of communication is getting through, not getting information out. We can't just like, well, got on my side, I've got all the information out, my work is done. In truth, we're creating barriers because we're skipping some of these basic rules. And here's a little fun fact. If we went back to where I honed my skill for taking complex ideas and making them simple and becoming a champion for communication that gets through, not just getting information out. I started my career and spent my first 15 years in technology and software development, internet strategy, and the financial industry. And so I worked in technical writing and technical support, and I worked with people at all skill levels, and I had to find ways to take these complex and sometimes not so complex and make it where they would have a handle to grow onto, to grab onto. And then spending 12 years, well, now it's been over 15, 16, oh my gosh, 21 years in the church space. My heart beats for removing barriers there more than ever. So those two combinations, it really rests in this, right? Like I love it and I want everybody else to love it too. And I think that's what you want as well. But this is what we're trying to avoid. Okay, so let's get into this. So how are we going to pivot outward and just deal with the reality that we have in this digital transformation and how we handle digital content? It's important for us to keep this in mind. A couple of simple tips. This is the reality, and I pulled this information from the book, The Smarter Screen by Shlomo Ben-Zardi. It was good. You do not need to read it. I'm just sourcing. I'm just like crediting my source, but I know I have readers in the Episcopal Church. So if you're wanting to scan this or look at the executive summary, this is where it came from. But your website is 1 in a billion. There are literally over 1 billion websites online right now. The human brain is only capable of storing 4 pieces of short-term information at a time. Their short-term memory only holds, the average human, only holds 4 pieces of short-term memory. You want to make sure that what you're leading with on your screen is no more than 4 pieces, because that's what they're going to remember. It's what they're going to carry. It's what they're going to share, even in how you do your information architecture. More clicks is not bad. More scrolling is. And so that's important to keep in mind. Also, anytime somebody is doing more than one thing at a time, if they're doing 2 things at once, immediately the brain notices 50% less of their surroundings, 50% less of the content in front of them if they're doing more than one thing at a time. This was before the screen, but even more so with the screen. It's just how our human brains is organized. So if I'm driving and I'm taking a phone call, even hands-free, and I'm taking a phone call while I'm driving, I immediately notice 50% less of my surroundings. Sometimes that may mean a red light or a stop sign or a pedestrian, because my brain is not 100% focused. I can't expand my brain's capacity to notice. I still have that finite a bit, so when I'm splitting it, All right, it's important to know that. But here's the good news, and I want to share this with you. This reinforces everything we talked about. Keeping an eye on my time. Oh, we're good, we're good. It reinforces everything we talked about. If you do one thing well, there's a thing called the halo effect when it comes to websites and digital environments. If you do one thing well, it influences a person's judgment about your whole website. And that's called the halo effect. You're appealing to their user subconscious. So if you make your site easy to use, you simplify the options, you get more personable in your content, they're going to be more forgiving about so much, because you want to know what makes a good website? One that people can use, one that works, not one that has all kinds of crazy design and lots of content. So that's something I want to share. Another thing, this is just a reinforcement. Here are 2 books. Again, you do not need to dig into these, but these are just crucial when it comes to web usability or like people using screens. They give like the basics, and there's some simple things you can keep in mind. I extracted all you need to carry, and it is just use the real world familiarity in your language and how people organize. Think of the websites that you're using, right? What's the basics? Like when I go to Amazon, I just need the search screen, which is the other thing. Make sure you've got a search screen. People just they don't need you to figure out what they need. They just need you to make it easy for them to find what they need. Always have a home button so people don't get lost on your site. Efficiency is a high value for people in their websites and their all digital engagements. They just need it to be very efficient, very fast. And this is also for email as well. Efficient, fast. I need to be able to scan this. And the minimalist design is tremendous value. And I'm only talking about digital communication channels right now, all right? I don't need you to change everything you do. Let's start there, or in your bulletin handout. And just keep in mind, everybody that is using, I don't care if it's a handout or the stuff on your screen, they're going there to get something done. They want to get an answer to a question. They want to sign up for something. They want to look at a calendar. They're trying to make decisions about their life. Make it easy for them. Make it easy for them to take action. Here are some quick examples of how this was done. This was a quick snapshot of a church in Las Vegas that before COVID, this was a fancy, like, multimedia hyper stimulation, because that's the environment that they're in, and it had motion graphics and lots of options and dynamic interfaces. And when COVID hit, they shut it all down. It doesn't look like this anymore, but they shut it all down, and they said, all we need right now are these buttons. And notice these buttons, they're not even the same size, and there's nothing fancy on here, but this is great user interface. It matches all that stuff. It's minimalistic. I know I can't get lost. I can just take action right away with these buttons. What I need is very clear. That church I told you I was learning about from Boston in recent weeks, this is another way they present their information. Instead of scrolling long content and lots of pages, they put everything in this snapshot, in this time block calendar. So people can scan, and there's 2 ways I can scan. I can scan by, well, 3 actually. I can scan by topic, right? Because I can just see what the events are. I could scan by day, because maybe I've only got 1 day available this week, so I just need to see what's available on that day. Or I can scan by function. They've got 4 purposes of their church. Everything that happens falls in one of these buckets. Remember the first thing we talked about? Narrowing our focus. They focused on 4 buckets: connecting, formation, life, neighboring, and they all have a color code. And so if there's a particular function I am looking for, I can just scan for all the light blue, and I know that that's about connecting. So that is a way where we're pivoting outward, and we're thinking not just what we're offering, but how are people going to use this? And so that's the end of my prepared content for everyone today. Yeah, somebody was paying attention. Richard, I didn't dig that deep. We should look at that later. Worship is life. All right, this is what I want to leave you with as you kind of contemplate and meditate and think about our time together today. Just walk away with 3 questions, and each of these questions will get at the 3 ingredients you need to make your institutional communication more effective. It'll include the connect, engage, and share. It'll help you narrow the focus, make it personal, and pivot outward. So here are the questions I want you to walk away with. And you can think about this for your parish content, or you can just think about it with your own content. Either one. One, what should go on hold until it makes sense again? Doesn't mean I have to cut it forever, but maybe I just cut it for right now. The second question, where can we cut extra words and complexity? Maybe not everywhere, but there's a few places we could. Let's start there. Let's make it more personable. And the third question, how are people using what we're posting? Let's go one step farther than just getting the information out there. And let's think about what people are dealing with when they actually encounter that information. And is there a way we can make it easier to use? All right, so that is that. And we have 3 minutes. I probably have time for one question, but I want to thank everyone for being here today and for your time and for what you're doing. You matter. I am grateful for you. Take care of yourself. And I can turn this back over to Keely, and I'll stop sharing my slides.
Hey, everyone. So our time's up. Thank you so much, Kem. I keep learning, right? Every time I keep learning something, one little nugget. So friends, I think we understand from this that there's more here in communications. We only had 90 minutes to get through 3 really important questions. Is a great start. We know that communications is one of the primary areas that our parishes and our leadership have asked for help. And so we are working on a training for later in the summer. Stay tuned. We'll give you more information about that pretty soon. We're just finalizing some details. Yeah, we'll send you out a follow-up, like a link to the video and some resources as well. So thanks again. Kem, any last words?
Bye, everyone.
All right, bye. Thanks so much.